There was a time, not too long ago, when young men from every corner of America found themselves halfway across the world, deep in the jungles of Vietnam. They carried rifles and radios, letters from home, and photographs tucked into their helmets. But among the many things that shaped their daily lives, one memory stands out stronger than the rest: the food they were given to survive. For soldiers in Vietnam, meals weren't served on porcelain plates in quiet kitchens. Instead, they came sealed in green cans, stacked in field packs, and opened with a steel P-38 can opener. The army called them C-rations. Soldiers called them many other names, most of them unprintable. Some of these meals brought comfort, reminding a soldier of home if only for a moment. Others brought groans, jokes, and even disgust. But whether welcomed or hated, they became part of the story of life in Vietnam. Every can, every cracker, every packet of powdered drink was a reminder that these young men were far from home, living on whatever the government could ship across the Pacific. To this day, veterans remember not just the battles and the buddies, but the taste, or more often, the aftertaste, of the food that kept them going. Tonight, we'll open those old green cans once again. We'll look at 25 of the most shocking, surprising, and unforgettable meals that American soldiers ate in Vietnam. Some will make you smile. Others may make your stomach turn. But together, they help us understand what it meant to serve in that time and place. So let's begin with one of the most infamous meals of them all. Point 1. C-ration, ham and Lima beans. They called it ham and Lima beans. But ask any Vietnam veteran, and they'll tell you it went by another name, ham and mother. Well, you can guess the rest. This meal arrived in a plain can, stamped with nothing more than a number. Inside was a mix of pale Lima beans and chunks of ham, all swimming in a greasy liquid. The smell hit you first, something between wet cardboard and old smoke. Then came the taste. To most soldiers, it was bitter, chalky, and impossible to finish. Yet despite the universal hatred, ham and Lima beans kept showing up. Soldiers joked that the army must have had warehouses filled with the stuff, and that somewhere, someone in Washington thought it was a delicacy. Some men traded it away the moment they opened their pack. Others buried it in the mud just to avoid carrying it. But there's a twist. For a few rare soldiers, ham and Lima beans wasn't the worst of the lot. A handful even admitted they liked it, if only because it was packed with protein and filled an empty stomach. Still, for most veterans, the memory of that can bring a grimace, a laugh, or both. And it set the tone for just how unpredictable army meals could be in Vietnam. Point 2. Fruitcake from a can. If ham and Lima beans was the meal that soldiers dreaded, fruitcake in a can was the dessert that left them puzzled. Imagine it. You're sweating in the sweltering heat of the jungle, dust clinging to your uniform, when you open your ration to find a dense, sticky block of fruitcake. Heavy with candied fruit and syrup, it was a dessert better suited for Christmas at Grandma's than combat in Southeast Asia. The cake was cloyingly sweet, sometimes sticky enough to glue itself to the sides of the tin. Eating it felt less like a treat and more like a chore. Some soldiers joked it could double as a doorstop. Others hoarded it, saving it for moments when a sugar rush was desperately needed. And yet, for all its oddness, there was something oddly comforting about that little can of fruitcake. It reminded men of holiday traditions back home, even if it was eaten miles from anything resembling home. From dessert to another curious main course, soldiers quickly learned that not every meat dish looked, or tasted, the way you expected. Point 3. Turkey loaf. Among the green cans of C-rations, one label stood out as especially confusing: turkey loaf. Soldiers opened it hoping for slices of roasted turkey, maybe even something that carried a whiff of Thanksgiving. What they got instead was a grayish block of compressed meat, so dense it wobbled like gelatin. The army claimed it was turkey. The soldiers weren't so sure. Many compared it to cat food or a slab of rubber. The taste was salty, the texture mealy, and chewing it felt endless. Yet, for men who hadn't seen a home-cooked meal in months, it still beat going hungry. A few soldiers found creative ways to make it palatable, heating it over a small fire, mixing it with crackers, or drowning it in hot sauce. But for most, turkey loaf became another symbol of the strange compromises of military life. Still, if you had turkey loaf in your pack, you could usually trade it. And in a war zone, trades were a currency of their own. That spirit of trading and stretching rations was especially true with the next item, one that became a soldier's go-to snack. Point 4. Peanut butter and crackers packs. Few things were more common, or more reliable, than the small tin of peanut butter tucked into a ration box. Alongside it came the legendary John Wayne crackers, dry, thick, and hard enough to chip a tooth. Together, they formed one of the simplest meals a soldier could count on. The peanut butter was stiff, often needing to be stirred with a stick or knife before it could be spread. In the sweltering Vietnam heat, it sometimes turned oily. The crackers were so dry they nearly demanded a canteen of water just to swallow. But the combination offered protein, calories, and, most importantly, a familiar taste. Many soldiers relied on peanut butter and crackers when other rations proved inedible. Some saved them for long patrols or late nights in the field. Others traded them, knowing the packs were in constant demand. For men far from American kitchens, that simple smear of peanut butter was a taste of home, one of the few foods that didn't feel entirely foreign. But if peanut butter and crackers offered comfort, the next ration attempted to offer a home-cooked classic and missed the mark entirely. Point 5. Spaghetti and meatballs in a can. Spaghetti and meatballs should have been a safe bet. After all, it was a dish beloved by families across America. But when it came out of a ration can in the jungles of Vietnam, it became something else entirely. The noodles were mushy and slippery, often breaking apart before a fork could lift them. The meatballs were small, rubbery, and floating in a watery tomato sauce that was more sour than savory. Soldiers joked that the army had taken an Italian favorite and stripped it of everything good. Still, it carried one advantage: variety. After weeks of beans, loaves, and crackers, even poor spaghetti tasted like a break in routine. Some men heated it over a small flame, hoping warmth would coax out a little more flavor. Others simply forced it down and moved on. For many veterans, that can of spaghetti became a reminder of the gulf between the comfort of home and the harsh reality of war. It was food that tried to feel familiar, but in the end, only made the distance feel greater. And so, with each meal, soldiers learned to take what they were given, good, bad, or unforgettable. Point 6. Powdered orange drink, Tang. In theory, Tang was meant to brighten a soldier's day. A scoop of orange powder, a splash of water, and suddenly you had a fruity drink in the middle of the jungle. But in practice, Tang was chalky, overly sweet, and left a film on your teeth. Still, for many young men, it carried the promise of something familiar. Advertisements back home tied Tang to astronauts and adventure, but in Vietnam it was simply a way to mask the taste of warm, metallic canteen water. Some soldiers stirred it thick, almost like syrup. Others dumped the powder straight into their mouths for a quick sugar jolt. No one would call it refreshing in the tropical heat, but it was better than plain water, and sometimes better than nothing. From a sugary drink, many turned to something far more bitter, yet just as essential to life in the field. Point 7. Freeze-dried coffee packets. For tired eyes and weary bodies, coffee was a lifeline. Each ration box came with a small pouch of instant coffee, black powder meant to dissolve in hot water. Soldiers rarely had the luxury of hot water, so more often than not, they stirred it into lukewarm canteen water or swallowed it cold. The result was gritty, harsh, and more punishment than pleasure. Yet men drank it anyway. It wasn't about taste, it was about staying awake during long nights on watch, about having something to sip when silence weighed heavy. For many veterans, the smell of that bitter instant coffee lingers in memory more strongly than the taste. It was a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, small comforts mattered. But if coffee was fuel, the next item was a true test of a soldier's teeth and patience. Point 8. John Wayne crackers. They weren't officially named after the Duke, but soldiers swore only a man like John Wayne could bite into them without flinching. The crackers in C-rations were rock-hard, thick, and nearly indestructible. Many soldiers joked they were designed to last longer than the war itself. Alone, they were nearly inedible. Paired with peanut butter, cheese spread, or even canned meat, they became manageable. In desperate times, some men crumbled them into soups or coffee just to soften them. What made them memorable wasn't the flavor, It was the shared humor around them. Soldiers bonded over the challenge of eating those crackers, laughing through the difficulty. And in a war where laughter was scarce, even a bad cracker played its part. Yet while crackers brought some levity, the next meal brought nothing but groans. Point 9. Chopped ham and eggs. Few rations drew more disgust than the can labeled chopped ham and eggs. Inside was a pale, congealed mixture of rubbery ham and scrambled eggs, pressed into a block. Opening the can released a smell that turned stomachs before the first bite. The texture was spongy, the taste metallic, and most soldiers pushed it aside. Some buried it, others tossed it, and a few traded it to the unlucky. Even when heated, it was more punishment than nourishment. Yet, in the strange logic of war, even chopped ham and eggs had its defenders. Some soldiers ate it simply because others wouldn't, trading away better items in return. In the economy of rations, even the worst food had value. Still, it became a running joke, a dish so bad it was unforgettable. And sometimes, in that sea of disappointment, one small can brought a spark of sweetness. Point 10. Canned pineapple chunks. When soldiers pulled a can of pineapple chunks from their pack, it felt like striking gold. Sweet, juicy, and bursting with flavor, the pineapple stood out against the endless meat and beans. In the sticky heat of Vietnam, a bite of cold pineapple felt almost like luxury. Some soldiers saved their cans for special moments, birthdays, holidays, or after a hard patrol. Others devoured them instantly, unwilling to wait. Pineapple became a reminder of the world beyond the jungle, of beaches, sunshine, and life back home. It was more than just food. For many, it was a taste of normalcy, proof that something bright and sweet still existed. But sweetness never lasted long. The next can often brought soldiers right back to reality, greasy, salty, and unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. Point 11. Tinned sausages in grease. They looked harmless enough on the outside, a simple can marked sausages. But when soldiers pried it open, what greeted them was a sight they never forgot. Floating in thick, white grease were limp little sausages, pale and slick. Many said it looked more like something scraped from a mess hall drain than a meal meant for combat troops. The smell alone could turn a stomach. Some men forced them down quickly, chasing each bite with water. Others wouldn't touch them, giving the can away in trade. More than a few simply tossed it aside. Still, there were those who swore by the sausages. Warmed over a small fire, drained of grease, they became a rare breakfast in the field. For those men, the sausages, terrible as they were better than going without. But most soldiers agreed, it was food you endured, not enjoyed. Ointment 12. Beefsteak with potatoes. Compared to sausages in grease, beefsteak with potatoes sounded like a hearty, familiar meal. And in some ways, it was, if you ignored the toughness of the steak and the saltiness of the potatoes. Opening the can revealed a gray slab of meat with a scattering of small potato chunks, all swimming in brine. Chewing the beef was a workout, and many soldiers joked you needed a bayonet just to cut it. The potatoes, often mushy, were more salt than substance. Yet, strangely enough, beefsteak with potatoes became one of the more popular rations. Maybe it was the name, or maybe it was the memory of Sunday dinners back home. Whatever the reason, soldiers often traded for it. It wasn't fine dining. But in a war zone, sometimes it was the closest thing to a meal that felt familiar. Point 13. Beans with frankfurters. When soldiers saw beans with frankfurters in their ration box, many breathed a small sigh of relief. Here, at last, was something recognizable, a dish close to baked beans and hot dogs. The beans were soft and filling, the frankfurters small and salty. Heated up, it even smelled like something from a backyard cookout. For many men, it was comfort in a can. But comfort came with a price. The beans were notorious for causing stomach problems, and in the field, that was no laughing matter. Still, soldiers often ranked this among the better meals. It reminded them of home, of ball games and barbecues, of simpler days. In a war where nothing felt normal, that was worth more than gold. Point 14. Chocolate discs, survival ration. Tucked away in many ration kits were small, dense discs of chocolate. They weren't meant to be a treat, but a survival food, high in calories, packed with energy, and designed to last for years. The taste was bitter, waxy, and far from sweet. Chewing them felt like biting into a bar of hardened candle wax. But in desperate moments, they kept men going. Some soldiers nibbled them slowly, others melted them into coffee to make it drinkable. Though disliked, those little chocolate discs carried a certain weight. They weren't about pleasure. They were about survival. And survival was the heart of every day in Vietnam. Point 15. Cheese spread in a can. Of all the strange foods soldiers encountered, few inspired stronger opinions than the cheese spread. It came in a small tin, bright orange, and so sticky it clung to knives, crackers, and fingers alike. Some soldiers loved it, smearing it on John Wayne crackers or mixing it with meat for extra flavor. Others despised it, claiming it tasted like plastic or smelled like motor oil. Still, it became one of the most traded items in the field. When you found cheese spread in your ration, you knew you'd have no trouble swapping it for something you like better. And in the economy of soldiers' meals, that made it valuable. The cheese may not have tasted like home, but it was part of the daily ritual, one more reminder that in war, you learned to take what you were given. Point 16. Powdered milk. Few rations caused more disappointment than powdered milk. It came in a small packet of fine white powder, promising a taste of home. But the moment it was mixed with water, often warm, often metallic tasting, the illusion fell apart. The powder rarely dissolved completely, leaving chalky clumps that floated on the surface. For many soldiers, it was almost undrinkable. Some forced it down just for the calories. Others mixed it into coffee or Tang to hide the taste. A few gave up on it entirely, tossing it aside. And yet, even with all its flaws, powdered milk carried a strange kind of hope. Just seeing the word milk reminded men of home, of breakfast tables and childhood mornings. It was a reminder that even far from America, the army was trying to bring a piece of it along. Point 17. C-ration pound cake. Hidden inside certain ration boxes was a rare treasure, pound cake. Dry, crumbly, and often lacking much flavor, it was hardly the kind of dessert you'd find in a bakery. But in the field it was gold. Soldiers saved pound cake for special occasions. Birthdays, holidays, or after long patrols, a slice of pound cake felt like a reward. Some paired it with canned fruit, others spread peanut butter on it, turning it into something closer to the real thing. It wasn't about the taste as much as the feeling. For a moment, a bite of pound cake could make a soldier feel human again, not just a body in a uniform. Point 18. Canned bone chicken. When soldiers saw boned chicken on a can, they imagined something hearty, maybe roasted pieces or shredded meat. What they got was a slimy, pale mess of chicken scraps suspended in gelatin. The texture turned many stomachs. It slid out of the can in one piece, wobbling like jelly. Some soldiers refused to touch it. Others forced it down only when hunger left no choice. But with a little creativity, mixed with crackers, rice, or even hot sauce, the chicken could be turned into something almost edible. It wasn't anyone's favorite, but for some, it was fuel enough to keep marching. Point 19. Rice with local additions. Not every meal came from a green can. Sometimes, soldiers traded or bartered with locals for rice. Freshly cooked and steaming, it was a welcome break from processed rations. Some mixed it with canned meat or vegetables from their packs. Others added local spices or hot sauce to make it something special. Rice reminded soldiers of how far from home they really were. It was the staple food of Vietnam, eaten by the very people they lived among. For many, sharing rice with locals was one of the rare moments of human connection in a war defined by distance. Point 20. Thrushen beans and ham. Another infamous meal was beans and ham. Unlike its cousin ham and Lima beans, this one was slightly more tolerable, salty beans with small chunks of ham mixed in. But the saltiness was overwhelming, and many soldiers joked it could dry your mouth out faster than the sun. It filled the belly, but it also left soldiers reaching for their canteens again and again. And like many bean dishes, it caused its fair share of stomach trouble in the field. Still, compared to some rations, beans and ham was almost welcome. It was proof that even in Vietnam, the army tried, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, to give its soldiers a meal that felt hearty. Point 21. Candy-coated chewing gum. Tucked into nearly every ration pack was a small piece of gum, sometimes peppermint, sometimes spearmint, always wrapped tight. For many soldiers, it was more than just gum. It was a moment of normalcy. The flavor, though, faded within minutes, leaving behind a bland rubber chew. Still, men chewed it on patrols, while writing letters, or just to keep nerves steady. In a place where everything felt foreign, that little piece of gum carried a quiet comfort. It was small, but it reminded men of drugstore counters and childhood days back home. Point 22. Tinned peas and carrots. When soldiers cracked open a can of peas and carrots, they were met with soft, colorless vegetables swimming in brine. The texture was mushy, the flavor nearly gone. For most, it was a reminder that fresh vegetables were thousands of miles away. Some forced them down for the vitamins. Others mixed them with meat to disguise the taste. But few ever looked forward to them. To many veterans, peas and carrots became the very picture of army food, plain, bland, and far from home. Point 23. Fruit cocktail in syrup. On the better days, a soldier might find a can of fruit cocktail waiting in his ration box. Peaches, pears, grapes, and cherries, all swimming in syrup thick enough to coat your fingers. In the jungle heat, it was sticky, messy, but unforgettable. For some men, it was the highlight of their meal. Sweetness was rare, and fruit cocktail brought a taste of luxury to a weary soldier's day. It wasn't fresh, but it was a reminder that somewhere out there, sweetness still existed. Point 24. Spam-like pork loaf. Perhaps no ration inspired more groans than the pork loaf. Pressed into a rectangular block, slick with gelatin, it slid out of the can like something better suited for a laboratory than a kitchen. The texture was rubbery, the flavor overly salty. Soldiers joked it wasn't pork at all, but some mystery meat that had been sitting in a warehouse since World War II. Many traded it away instantly. A few found ways to fry or mix it with crackers, but for most, it was a ration best forgotten. Point 25. Improvised meals with hot sauce. If there was one secret weapon in a soldier's mess kit, it wasn't a rifle or a can opener, it was hot sauce. Many carried bottles in their pockets, picked up from care packages or bought from locals. A splash of heat could transform even the worst ration into something bearable. Ham and Lima beans? A little hot sauce made it edible. Bone chicken? Drown it in heat and it almost tasted like food. For soldiers far from home, hot sauce became more than flavor. It was survival, a way to wrestle dignity from meals that so often lacked it. Looking back now, it's easy to laugh at the strange meals American soldiers were given in Vietnam. The fruitcake in a can, the waxy chocolate, the dreaded ham and Lima beans. But for the young men who carried those green cans through the jungle, each meal was more than food. It was a reminder of distance, a reminder of home, and sometimes a reminder of just how much they had to endure. Some meals brought comfort, others brought only groans and jokes. But all of them became part of the shared story of a generation of soldiers who served far from American soil. When veterans gather today, they still talk about those rations, laughing about John Wayne crackers, shaking their heads at pork loaf, and remembering the small sweetness of pineapple or pound cake. In the end, the story of these meals is not just about food. It is about young men, far from home, doing their best to find comfort in the small things, whether it was a can of beans, a stale cracker, or a piece of fruitcake that reminded them of Christmas. These rations were more than fuel. They were a symbol of survival, of resilience, and of the quiet strength that carried soldiers through the jungles of Vietnam. Here at the World Tapestry, we believe history is made not only in battles and speeches, but also in the simple, everyday moments that shaped lives. If you'd like to journey deeper into these forgotten stories, we invite you to subscribe and become part of keeping these memories alive. Because when we look back, we discover not just what America was, but who we were and how far we've come. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time here on the World Tapestry.